Welcome to Entrepreneurs Unplugged. My name is Brad Bernthal. I'm an associate professor here at Colorado Law School and the director of the Entrepreneurship Initiative for our Silicon Flatiron Center. Terrific to team with Venture Partners. You're going to hear from Bryn Reese here momentarily to present this event. Also appreciate the efforts of Solid Power's team to make this happen. Haven is here, has been very closely involved in the planning of the event. It is awesome to be back in person. Appreciate everybody here braving snow and broken parking meters to make this happen. To the extent that the codes did not work for you, we've got a call in there and we've asked them not to be ticketing. If it turns out to be an issue, let us know and we will figure that out afterwards. What a great story from CU to reinitiate some of our in-person events. We've actually got a terrific turnout tonight. In addition to those who are here in person, we've got a robust number of people who are joining online and really terrific to be telling this story with Conrad and Sihi, the professors whose research really was the core of Solid Power here as well. So if there's disputes about the story, it could be kind of fun in terms of the back and forth between the professors and Doug and others who've been involved in this story. Just by show of hands, how many of you have been to an Unplugged session before tonight? All right, so a lot of people coming for the first time. Welcome, first of all. The event is premised around entrepreneurial storytelling. And so Sally and I are going to be talking to Doug about both his personal journey in entrepreneurship and then a special element here with respect to Solid Power and the process of bringing Solid Power to where it is today. Here's how we're going to proceed. First, I'm going to turn things over to Bryn momentarily for an introduction. And then Sally and I are going to conduct about 50 minutes or so of Q&A with Doug, and then we'll open it up to Q&A with everybody for about 30 minutes or so. And then finally, next door in Betcher, we'll have a reception to follow. So that's where we're going. We start these sessions with an opportunity for community announcements. So if you have a job opening that you're looking to fill, if you are looking to find a job, and or if there's an event on campus that you or off campus in the community that you're looking to highlight, we'll give you an opportunity to do so. Before opening that up, I want to thank our Silicon Flatiron supporters. We're an organization that relies on our supporters to make events like this happen. So special thanks to all of them. I get to do a lot of the talking. We've got a terrific team here at Silicon Flatirons. Nate Mariotti is up here, fresh off of paternity leave. Welcome back, Nate. He's effectively our Chief Operating Officer. Shannon Sturgeon, Sarah Schnickren, and Catherine Coble, all closely involved. And we've got some student volunteers out front. If you get a chance to thank them, please do so for helping make tonight happen. And so with that, I'll open it up. Any events upcoming on or off campus in the community, looking to hire, looking for a job, the floor is open.
I can kick it off.
It's all yours.
So I was told yesterday that Ball Aerospace in their finance department is hiring a number of positions from entry level on up. So if you're interested in finance, Ball Aerospace is a great place to be looking. Come find me.
Full-time or internships?
Full-time.
Okay, great. Other openings? Brandon, it's all yours.
So some of you may know that CU Boulder is now part of an I-Core hub, and that is a training institute for learning customer discovery and business model canvas. I expect that may be something that was part of the Solid Power story along the way. But if some of you are researchers at the university thinking about commercialization, this is a program for you. And I know there's some of you because I was eavesdropping upstairs and somebody said they were in chemical engineering. So this program is for you. Early April, it's a workshop, experiential learning, get you out of your lab and talking to customers.
Other announcements. I'll add that we are entering the event season for the New Venture Challenge as a platform for entrepreneurs coming off the campus, faculty, staff, students who are starting a company. We've got prize nights upcoming, and then the NVC championships this year will be pandemic provided at the Boulder Theater back in person on April, let me make sure I get the date right, April 12th at 5:30 p.m. For those of you who have been there, you know this. If you haven't been to the NVC Championships, this is like the best kind of startup community party. It is a ton of fun, and I'm really kind of hoping this will feel like a reopening for the startup community. So April 12th, 5:30 at the Boulder Theater. So with that, we've got a great tradition here. Take a minute, look around you, introduce yourself to someone you've not met before tonight. We'll take 2 minutes for this, and then I'm gonna turn things over to Bryn for the introduction. Go. To try to bring folks back into the discussion. Want to introduce Bryn Reese, who is the Director of Venture Partners here at CU. Bryn, take it away.
All right. Hi, everybody. It's great to see some hardcore entrepreneurs out braving the weather. So in tonight's Entrepreneurs Unplugged with Doug Campbell of Solid Power, we are going to be delving into the world of deep tech. So I heard deep tech being thrown around upstairs a little bit, and it's a term that's being rapidly adopted to mean ventures that are rooted in science and in technology. So this spans fields like clean tech, like we're going to hear about tonight, but also biotechnology, quantum science, aerospace, and others. And universities really play a special role in deep tech. The university research labs are not only a crucible for new innovations, but in some cases can be the catalyst of an entirely new industry itself. And Doug's company, Solid Power, certainly fits the bill here. So Solid Power spun out of the labs of Professor C. Healy and Conrad Stolt, who are here in the front row, which is a wonderful surprise, and definitely fits the bill of deep tech. This is all solid state battery technology that I know we'll be talking about more in the conversation. And Solid Power is one of a growing number of deep tech startups that are coming out of universities and really making a significant commercial impact. There are some special features to deep tech versus other types of ventures. So typically speaking, they can have a longer pathway to market. They can take more capital to reach market. And very often they place more reliance on intellectual property to span that runway. But there's also some things about deep tech ventures that really are not especially unique and that do line up with the other types of startups that we see across our ecosystem. And maybe most importantly among all of those is the critical importance of the team and the leadership. So no matter how sophisticated or complex or new a technology is, the founding scientists, and entrepreneurs who run the business are so critical. So we'll be focusing on that this evening and have such a pleasure and delight to hear from Doug about all of the near misses, the actual misses, the successes, and everything along the way that has got Solid Power to where it is. So I'm going to be introducing now our three fantastic speakers, and I'll start with the moderators and Brad. So Brad is an associate professor at the University of Colorado Law School, interim executive director of Silicon Flatirons, and the director of Entrepreneurship, the Entrepreneurship Initiative at Silicon Flatirons. Professor Bernthal specializes in startups, entrepreneurial law, early stage finance, including angel investment and venture capital. His current research studies, he currently researches finance instruments in startup investment. Prior to that, Brad studied investment accelerators, providing legal scholarships first work on the topic. And Brad leads the Entrepreneurial Law Clinic at Colorado Law, which provides help to about 20 startups a year. So it's been a great privilege for me to collaborate with Brad over the years. And I would say it's fairly common, maybe at least once a week, I found myself thinking, what would Brad do? Especially when I'm in a tense situation. That's a helpful thing for me.
Because then you do the opposite.
It's the Costanza technique. No, but incidentally, in preparing for these introductions, I did not think, what would Brad do? Because if I did, it would probably be a professional wrestling announcer voice doing the intros. If you want to hear that, second plug, April 12th, NBC Championships, it's going to happen. Okay. Our second moderator is Sally Hatcher. And Sally is a serial entrepreneur, advisor, startup accelerator faculty member, impact investor, and board member. She co-founded and was president of 2 companies, including Precision Photonics, a laser and optoelectronics company. Starting in the garage, another commonality we see in deep tech here. The company shipped high volume products to China and grew to a 50+ person, highly profitable venture before a successful acquisition. Her second company, Light Deck Diagnostics, focuses on novel point of care medical and animal diagnostics using laser-based waveguide systems to detect up to 80 biomarkers at once. Sally is a national I-Corps instructor for both the NSF and the DOE, and stood up the venture development programs at Venture Partners at CU Boulder. And very excited to be able to talk about this in more public forums now, but Sally is a managing partner at Buff Gold Ventures, which is CU Boulder's new venture capital fund. So it's been another privilege of mine, to work with Sally very closely over the last 4 years in the Venture Partners team. And she is just a wealth of expertise and energy in our startup ecosystem, one of the various brightest points among so many bright points. So last, but of course, our featured entrepreneur this evening, he who shall be unplugged, is Doug Campbell. And Doug is CEO and co-founder of Solid Power. The company has extensive partnerships with both BMW and Ford to jointly develop all solid-state EV batteries. In October of last year, Solid Power announced a partnership with SK Innovation to validate Solid Power's automotive-scale all solid-state EV battery cells utilizing Solid Power's sulfide-based solid electrolyte, proprietary EV cell designs, and production processes. We're going to find out what that means, I think, pretty soon. The company was initially funded by prominent investors, including Hyundai, Volta Energy Technologies, Umicore, Sano, A123 Systems, and Solvay. In parallel with establishing Solid Power, he also founded I2C Solutions, a thermal management company, and co-founded Rocore, a component supplier for the small satellite industry. I2C and Rocore merged in 2015. Mr. Campbell served as the CEO of Rocore until the end of 2018 and remained on its board of directors until the company was acquired in late 2020. He began his career in advanced technology development at the Space Vehicles Directorate of the Air Force Research Laboratory. Mr. Campbell holds a BS and MS in civil engineering with a structural mechanics emphasis from the University of New Mexico. And when I think of Doug and his role in our ecosystem, it actually makes me think back to your research, Brad. And Brad has described a profile of somebody, an entrepreneur, a leader in the community who mentors and gives back, even when it's not immediately obvious what the self-gain would be. And of course, that type of person is so fundamentally critical to a vibrant startup ecosystem like we have on the Front Range, and is also part of the reason why we have Doug here this evening. So wonderful to have all 3 of you here, and I'm passing it over for the evening. Thank you.
So parenthetically, this story we were talking about is part of a pretty remarkable year in which CU-based companies raised over $2 billion in 2021. Of course, Solid Power being notable among those companies, but big credit to Bryn, the entire Venture Partners team, as well as Kate Tolman, who was the predecessor of Bryn at what was then Tech Transfer along the way. Doug, to get things started, first of all, thank you for being here. If Sally's amenable to, I'm going to ask two questions. The first is about Solid Power today, just to sort of level set. And then I'm going to take you back to when you were growing up back in Albuquerque. Bryn talked about solid state battery technology. Tell individuals, where is Solid Power today? You went public in December. How do you make money? Just the level set part.
Yeah, absolutely. So we did indeed go public late last year. Basically what the intent of that fundraising exercise is really to bridge us to a revenue sustaining company. Right now we produce two products at Solid Power. The obvious one is the solid state battery itself. That's of course what we provide to companies like BMW and Ford, and then we also produce the solid electrolyte that goes into the battery. Long term, we do not want to be a battery company. That is a tough business, and then of course you have to go and displace some fairly prominent companies. In my opinion, that would be a suicide mission. So long term, our focus is really a materials business, a chemical company focused on solid electrolyte and other associated materials. And the funding that we raised last year is enough to get us all the way through. So it fully funds our business model.
We're going to come back to that. Let's wind backwards. You're a kid from Albuquerque, New Mexico, went to New Mexico. Any indication, what were you like growing up? Any indication that entrepreneurship was in your future as you look back during those days?
Well, as a teenager, I was basically a punk-ass kid who barely graduated from Albuquerque public schools. So
are you being facetious or literally?
Literally, yeah. So when I was 18, 19 years old, I had no idea what I wanted to do. So certainly had no means to go to college, didn't have the grades to go to college. So basically I worked and discovered athletics. And so I pursued a career as a professional mountain biker in the late 90s and did that for a few years and then realized that I wasn't going to be the next Lance Armstrong. And so, of course, looking in hindsight, I guess I wasn't on the same playing field. But point being is I said, well, maybe I should go to college. Didn't know what I wanted to do. My mom was a civil engineer. So I went to civil engineering school. I got to the end of my bachelor's and I realized I really did not want to be a civil engineer. And so I went to sort of my unofficial advisor and he said, Doug, go to grad school. You'll figure it out. And so I did. And so that's what got me into aerospace. And then that's what kind of pulled me towards eventually into batteries.
One final question, I'll turn it over to Sally. I did not know that you were a professional mountain biker. How many years did you give it a run?
4 years as a pro.
And a past Unplugged participant was Jeremy Bloom, and it was super interesting to talk to him about his skiing and professional football career as it relates to, it sort of informed his style as a CEO. Does the mountain biking part of your life inform in any way how you think about your career as a CEO or how you act?
It does, and it really gets back to even what Bryn was saying about hard tech, deep tech. To be successful in what we're doing, I can't think of anything harder than developing a new battery. I mean, that is the very definition of hard. And so you've got to be in for the slog. It's a long battle, and you've got to just stay focused and just persistent. Cycling's the same way. It's a very, very hard sport. You've got to train constantly. There's really no off season, and oftentimes you're only as good as your last result. So yeah, I would say that the patience that it established in me, I think paid dividends in my business career.
Okay. So picking up on this narrative, you put yourself into grad school, you find a major degree you do like.
Eventually.
Okay. What'd you do?
Basically composite mechanics, primarily for aerospace structures.
Yeah.
And I did that technically for 4 or 5 years.
Yeah.
As in my professional career. And then ultimately what I concluded is that I was I like to call it a close enough engineer. So that's close enough. And kind of like in brain surgery, in engineering, you don't really want close enough. You want to the absolute precision.
Yeah.
But I could understand. I understood and I appreciated the difficulty of engineering. But what I was really good at was figuring out what we're going to do with this. Where's this going to go? And so that's kind of how my trajectory went. Because again, I only worked technically. I wasn't a very good engineer. Yeah. I only did that for a few years and then slowly moved into roles that were more kind of looking further afield. Where's this going? What's next?
That's so interesting. So composites sounds like plastics.
Yeah.
Composites. Okay, so yeah, was that what compelled you? Was it the composite, the thing in itself, or was it the job that you did every day?
No, it was the vision. It was, even now, with solid state batteries, the technology's cool, but it's the means to an end, as I like to say, and the means to the end is the end goal for us is enabling widespread, vehicle electrification. Yeah. For us, solid state is just the means to get there. Same with, whatever technology I was working on, there's an aspect of, the technology itself is cool, but what is it doing in the marketplace? That's what gets me excited.
Yeah. Okay, so that might explain, you had that job for, I think, 6 years, something like that. Okay, and then you jumped to your next job, and it's so funny on your LinkedIn, you go from being a clear engineer to being the guy that's in charge of business development, sales, and fundraising.
Because money's at the center of everything.
Wow, okay. So, that is a huge pivot. Did you train? How did you figure out how to do this?
No, and so when I met Conrad and Sehi back in 2011, and when I kind of got into their sphere, the tool in my toolkit, and it was admittedly one tool, was I knew how to get money out of the federal government. And that was how I got, that is how I got, and I got that lesson from those early years working in kind of small tech-focused firms. I got a PhD in how to get money out of the federal government. So that was the tool I brought to Solid Power, and we implemented it very well.
So you're seeing this less as a pivot, like I quit engineering and I started doing business development as more, I was an engineer who was able to tackle doing a major grant.
Yeah, I never left behind. Even today, I have to speak to technical people, highly technical people, and I have to sound like I know what I'm talking about. So yeah, I still consider myself an engineer, but again, that joking reference to close enough engineer. I'm not the guy going to turn the calcs or do the tests or that sort of thing.
Yep.
I just don't have the patience for it.
Yeah. So you see this as kind of a growth instead of like a 90-degree.
Exactly.
Super interesting.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
On the vision piece, we've been doing this series for about 15 years and also working with entrepreneurs in the community over the years. I've kind of developed a theory that I'll test with you, which is like the best entrepreneurs that I know, they know steps 1, 2, 5, and 10. They kind of have a sense about here's where it starts. Mm-hmm. I know somewhere in the middle we're going to have to get here, and I've got this vision for where it's going. Any reactions to that definition of a CEO of an emerging company where there's a lot of uncertainty first? And is that what spoke to you about becoming more of an entrepreneur as opposed to an engineer?
Absolutely, 100%. So to be a successful entrepreneur, you've really got to be comfortable with uncertainty. And I've seen it's either you are really comfortable with that or you're not. And if you're not comfortable with uncertainty, don't be an entrepreneur, because you absolutely, you step into a new endeavor and you can see steps 1 or 2. But then after that, it's just, okay, let's just see how this goes. And we'll pivot, accordingly. And you just have to be very comfortable with that.
Okay, so maybe we can put that in context where you sit down with Sehi and Conrad, 2011, talk about what was there in terms of the technology that had been developed, and no shortage of uncertainties, but highlight like the top 3 uncertainties. Here's what we had to figure out.
Oh, wow. There was a lot. So when, and again, any sort of technology you're pulling out of a university, it's going to be very immature. You've demonstrated some basic scientific fundamentals. But by and large, you probably haven't demonstrated scalability. You probably haven't demonstrated economic viability. Oftentimes, there's still a ton of technical risks. It looks like it might work, but I don't know. We're going to have to, tweak this, this and that. And so that's, I think, when I sat down with Conrad and Sehi, that's, we basically, here's what we've got, here's what we've demonstrated, here's the potential. The risks are enormous. So, what's our strategy moving forward? And that really brings us full circle back to the one tool in my toolkit, which was, well, I know how to get money out of the federal government. This is actually potentially quite powerful because that's very patient capital. They don't take a seat on your board. They don't take any equity. And you can basically use that funding to essentially de-risk, and that's precisely what we did.
Let's drill down one level. What did you see that they had developed that made this very interesting? And then what risks specifically were you looking to target that with the federal grant money, we could figure out whether there's a there in the coming years?
So when I got connected with Conrad and Sehi, I'd had a couple of years of experience in doing business development for a battery group. So I knew what a cathode was. I knew what an anode was. I knew what an electrolyte was.
I don't know what those things are, but we can talk offline.
Actually, I don't either. So go ask Sehi and Conrad. No, but what solid state at that time was in kind of an early stage. There were some solid state commercial endeavors, but they looked totally different and weren't suitable for a market like electric vehicles. What Conrad and Sehi had done is they'd really shown that 100% solid state, which again, we've never pivoted from that. So the same sulfide-based materials that these guys were working with in their labs, certainly they've been tweaked and modified, but we're by and large are essentially working with the same materials. And they were showing no liquid components whatsoever. This was a battery and it worked. It was a small scale battery. Hadn't been shown to be scaled, but it showed that it could work. And so when I said before, the basic, fundamental science principles had been demonstrated, that's what we got from the university.
Just conceptually, talking to a lawyer, solid state versus liquid, what does solid state get you? Why was this intriguing and a potential leap forward?
So in solid state, basically, it's a very simple definition. You're replacing the liquid or gel electrolyte that's used in all of the batteries that we have with a solid ion conducting material. In our case, this was a sulfide-based solid ion conducting material. What it gets you, and by the way, this is my pitch. What it gets you is really a combination of improvements in energy, and it does so through enabling other kinds of electrode chemistries that are not otherwise considered to be viable in liquid or gel. Substantially improved safety. We're all well aware of thermal runaway issues related to lithium ion. The bad actor is the liquid electrolyte. Under an abuse condition, you generate heat. So let's say you punch a nail through your battery, you short the cell, it generates a lot of heat. It's that liquid electrolyte that ignites. Since we've gotten rid of that ignition source, we have a much more stable battery that it'll still fail under those abuse conditions, but you basically just have a dead brick instead of a thermal runaway. And then finally, sulfides are an inorganic material, very high temperature stability. I'm sure many of you are aware, lithium-ion batteries do not like to be hot, and that's actually why automakers go to such great lengths to integrate pack cooling schemes. We've shown that by and large, we don't need that. We don't degrade at elevated temperature.
Super helpful.
Yep.
Okay, so you see the potential of solid state. You all are sitting down, and then
Stop there.
Yeah, go ahead.
I just got to know, how did you meet these guys?
Really just through networking. In fact, we were talking about it before the event, I think through the Material Research Society.
So were you looking for a job?
No. So at the time, I quit my last real job in the summer of 2011. When I say real job, meaning I got paid by somebody else.
Yeah.
And I didn't have a plan. I just was tired of learning what not to do. So at that point, I was kind of a hired gun. I was going out looking at a bunch of different things, and I got drug into what eventually became Solid Power.
Okay, but wait, when you got drug in, I'm curious because there's so many battery technologies out there. There's so many choices. How did you know you wanted to work with these guys?
Well, they were nice guys.
Yeah,
So
don't work with jerks, right? That's your number one
That's
rule.
my number one rule. Don't work with jerks.
Yeah.
No, it was, so first of all, I joke and say they were nice guys. That let's not trivialize that. Your co-founders, you have to be compatible with your co-founders. And then for me, it's, is there potential here?
Yeah.
So.
Did you go out and, did you do your own analysis of 10 different battery?
Of course not.
So was it, I mean, is it a gut decision then? I mean, what makes you jump off this cliff?
Well, I mean, so at the end of the day, I like to think of myself as an opportunist. So an opportunity presented itself. I had convinced myself that there was some merit here.
Yeah.
And so, and again, bringing it back to the, parallels with being a professional athlete, I recognized it was probably going to take a couple years, and let's see if this sticks.
Yeah.
And it stuck.
Did they have money to pay you?
Nope.
Okay, so you were you told them I can raise money from the federal government and I can pay for myself.
And that'll take about a year.
Uh-huh.
And I think it took a year and a half.
Yep.
And so I had to scramble and do other things, doing odd consulting, and at the same time I had started those other businesses that were equally struggling to get off the ground. So it was, those were some lean years.
I want to come back to running multiple businesses at the same time. One more question though about, so you've explained that solid state, there's clear advantages. You can see the future of a bigger growing market going there, but you mentioned de-risking.
Mm-hmm.
What were the risks specific to this technology and the business model that you looked to de-risk using that grant money early on?
That it could work at scale. So, again, the data that was coming from the university was on, R&D, small scale kinds of batteries, which is what they do and continue and should do. And the risk with any of this is, can you replicate, that same data on, larger scale, and then scale that is highly manufacturable in a very cost-efficient means? It took us about 8 years to say yes to those questions.
And the feds are usually really good at funding the incredibly early stage.
Yep.
But so how did you find money to prove that it would work at a larger volume?
So we actually did quite well on the federal government funding side. I think in total from that 2012 through 2018-ish timeframe, we probably raised about 25 million in total. And it was a variety of different agencies and grants, and that's kind of how that works.
Yeah.
You're usually not going to get one chunk of money to get you. You've got to kind of cobble it together. So we were able to. I mean, that's kind of unheard of in our space, to go that long without raising any equity money.
Yeah.
But we were successful, and our strategy shifted right around 2017 from de-risking to, actually, I think we really got something here. We need to move a lot quicker.
In that development cycle, first of all, grad students involved, was the lab involved, or were you primarily doing this separate from CU? What's that look like? Are there publishable papers coming out? Like, can we scale what we did at a smaller scale?
Certainly not any published papers, because that's just not what we do as a company. But yeah, there was a time where our only facility were Conrad and Sehi's lab. Our employees, number 1 and 2, lived in a closet provided by Conrad and Sehi.
Very nice.
For a couple of months until we were able to get our own facility. So yeah, we did heavily leverage. I think during the early years, many of our employees would kind of come and go because they had certain equipment that we just couldn't afford to purchase and that sort of thing.
But when you say many of our employees, is this a small group? I mean, like 10 people?
I mean, so when they were literally sitting at CU, we were a team of 3.
Okay.
And two of them were technical staff sitting in their lab. That was for a few months. And then, we quickly grew to, I don't know, maybe 15 or 20 when we got into our own facility in Louisville.
Okay.
Was there, in that gestation period of trying to show that you could do this at scale, the solid state battery, was there an aha moment along the way? And was there any, maybe you can discuss one, oh man, this does not look good. Was there a dark moment of, it just doesn't seem to be working? And then anything that unlocked things that like, now we've got it, we see it, and here's what the key was.
No, there are never aha moments in batteries. Gains in batteries only comes through constant and lengthy pressure. So
Constant vigilance.
Yep.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay, well, wait.
And
then.
I wish that wasn't the case. I wish, sometimes I would kick myself a few years in, like, I should have gone into
So
software.
it was just 4, 5, 6 years of super incremental gains.
Yep, constant work.
And finally got to the
constant
point we think we're ready to roll.
Yeah.
All right, so let's pause right there because that sounds like a tremendous amount of work, unmitigated effort, and yet I think you were running 2 other companies at the same time. So back us up and tell us a little bit about Rocore and is it I2C, something like that?
Yep.
Okay. Can you explain how are you doing all of this? How many balls were in the air? What was going on?
Yeah, so I2C was the only company that I founded, and the only reason it's named I2C is because that was the domain name that I could get that was nice and clean, so I was smart enough to know that you got to start with that. And it was ostensibly, a quote-unquote for-profit incubator, and by and large it was successful because it's what kind of enabled both Solid Power and Rocore. Eventually it made no sense to keep it going as its own entity. It had a few projects going, and we ultimately just merged it into Rocore because it was the same team.
So it was basically, okay, wait, it was an incubator, or is the same?
That was its original vision, was that
to have other companies in or just incubate ideas? What was it incubating?
Well, I mean, we got involved in some work actually that the genesis for this also came from a different group at the University of Colorado Boulder, and that's how we got into thermal management. By and large, that's most of what it did.
Okay.
But again, as I said before, it was really the same team that was also over here doing the aerospace stuff. So
Okay.
it ultimately made sense to just merge it.
deep
So I only
risk
think of
technology.
really 2, kinda,
Okay.
and yeah, proving non-battery stuff, because batteries are hard, and I had one of those going, so one's all I needed.
Satellites are easier?
Relative to batteries,
Oh, wow.
but not nearly as impactful. So, I mean, enabling an electric transportation of the future, I mean, wow, I couldn't think of a more impactful sort of thing. Not to, disparage what Rocore was able to accomplish by, putting a bunch of components up on all these distributed satellites, but it's.
And stop and tell us, what was Rocore? What was the vision? What were you doing there?
Yep. So if you think of a satellite as kind of a box with a bunch of stuff hanging out of it, Rocore made the stuff that hung out of it for communications, antenna systems, power, so solar array systems, booms for different kinds of sensor packages and stuff like that. That's basically what Rocore focused on.
Okay. Okay, so, and did you have a team there? I mean, was it, ongoing entity, growing?
Yep.
What was it doing?
Yeah, so we are actually both companies were co-located up until I think the end of 2016 in the same facility, even shared the same back office, G&A type stuff, same financial team.
Nice.
Rocore moved out in early 2016, and that was really at the time when both companies really just started to take off in terms of numbers.
Okay, so you were literally the CEO with straddling a foot on
Right.
either side of this with the IC2.
I2C Solutions had already been merged, so it was gone.
Okay, so they're kind of gone, but you've got Rocore, you are launching stuff on this side and you are de-risking the battery on the other.
That's correct.
I mean, was this just like crazy taking off one hat and putting on the other?
It was too much, and I did it too long. I ran both of them for too long.
How do you know that?
I think once I slid over to Solid Power, it dawned on me that I had done that too long.
Yeah.
My successor at Rocore was frankly doing a better job because he was 100% focused, and now I was 100% well, with the exception of I was on the board, and
Yeah.
we were going to see where the company was going, but it was just very refreshing.
That's super interesting. So you couldn't see it when you were standing in between
I
them.
could, but it was like having 2 teenage children. They're like kind of adults, but still doing stupid stuff. So you sort of had to kind of, keep an eye on them.
Yeah, yeah.
16, it's hitting home now.
I've got 20 and 16.
In terms of going all in, what was behind that decision, and was it free?
Going all into Solid Power.
All in on Solid Power, yeah.
It was crystal clear that I needed to do that Rocore by and large could continue on without me, and that Solid Power was at a very formidable time because that was when we were shifting into raising money, and as I'm sure you're aware, investors don't like, extracurricular activities out of their entrepreneur CEOs.
No, the split CEO is a huge challenge. So what do you think how did you know that you were the right person? And what did you really see that you could bring to Solid Power?
Well, I was already holding the job.
You didn't have to interview.
We had a board at the time, so technically I could have been fired, and I wasn't. And I'm still here.
Yeah. And so you knew that you could, in some ways, pivot this, because as you de-risk, you're kind of done with the technical side in a way. I mean, this becomes very much a marketing and business development. It's a new company.
It is.
And you were ready to because again, that's a new skill set in some ways for you.
Yep. I was a government fundraising guy.
Yeah, exactly.
And all of a sudden I'm talking to venture capitalists and raising a Series A, then going into a Series B.
Yep. So back to that question, did you have advisors or mentors or anybody you asked how to do this, or did you just sort of
around the community enough that I knew, who was raising money. I knew, sort of the general ins and outs of how to do it. Ultimately, the gentleman who's now the president of Solid Power, which you're familiar with, is Dave Jansen. He's a longstanding investor, so had done venture funding, did angel funding. So, he was very much expert in all the, terms and conditions around that sort of thing. So I was able to rely on that.
Yeah. Did you ever feel this is so new. Did you ever feel like you just fell on your face? Or did you just, get really good at acting and faking it till you make it?
I'm not afraid of failure. And so, when it came time to raise money, to shift gears from the government funding to the venture funding, it's a totally different game, totally different cast of characters. I like challenges. So I was excited to take it on. And then, when we made the decision to go public, shifted gears again, totally different cast of characters, totally different process. And again, I was excited about it.
And see, I wonder again, was that a different shift? Because I would assume when you go public that you lawyer up enough.
Oh, it's a shift.
A whole team telling you, thou shalt say this, thou shalt not say this.
Right.
What was that like?
It was different. I'm an engineer, so so to be honest, I think that's proven me well, because as engineers, we're taught not to lie. We're taught to just stick to the facts and state only that. So it hasn't been that much of a shift, other than it's very front and center. Very front and center.
Yeah.
You raised outside money. What year did you go out fundraising?
We closed our Series A in 2018.
Okay, so for those that are not familiar with the nomenclature of venture capital, it's very imaginatively named. The first round of capital, sometimes a pre-seed or a seed round, but then we're going to Series A, Series B, Series C. So you do your Series A. For reference, a software company Series A round, 5 to 10 million would be pretty common. Battery technology, Series A round, how big was it?
Close to 30.
$30 million.
Yep.
Who did you raise from in that first round?
A lot of strategics.
Okay, so these are companies in your industry?
Yep, so it's groups like, so every large company has, a corporate venture arm. So when we say strategic investors, that's what we're talking about. So Samsung Ventures, Hyundai Venture, think of any company in the world, they're going to have a insert name ventures. And so ours was a who's who of strategic investors in the automotive space.
So were they seeding every battery company they saw, or was there a special lock and key that you felt got you
It
through the
varied.
door?
It varied. Some of them, like Samsung, they just go scattershot and fund everybody and see what happens. Others are a lot more targeted.
Yeah. Yeah. And what were you looking for besides money?
Well, so with strategic investors, you have to be careful. They bring money, but they usually want something. And not just the equity portion, they want something. They want some sort of lockup. And that's tough, because that can hamstring the business. And when you're, with that 30 million round, I think we had a syndicate of 7 or 8 investors, only one of which was financial. And so when you got 6 or 7 strategics, saying, okay, what do I get? That was a real tricky.
Can we linger on this for a second?
Yeah.
This is really interesting. So just to make sure everyone's on the same page, The strategic investors are bigger companies in the same industry. They've got some interest in the battery technology, maybe the automotive industry or electronics, et cetera, right? The financial investor is a standalone fund, I assume, that does not have an attachment to a company like Samsung, et cetera. So one thing that was very interesting is you said the syndicate had 6 strategics in it, which I think implicitly bakes in some competition. So
Correct.
not unusual, you'll see a strategic investor come in, because they think there's hot technology here, there's world-class professors behind it, flatter you guys a little bit, right? And we might be able to see this
Right.
and potentially acquire the company, but they also might want some exclusivity that, hey, we get to see the company, we get to see under the hood, and we sort of have an option to buy the company. Was that intentional from the start that you tried to get multiple strategics under the hood so that you'd have at least competition for that?
Partially. It's also, in 2018, raising 30 million for a battery company, especially your first round of investment, that's tough. And so, and to do it strictly on financials, because typically you'll want, and so maybe I'll just expand on your educational portion. So the nice thing about a financial investor is their incentives are 100% aligned with the company. It's all about making money. I want to make money off the amount that I invested in you. And that's great because that's what I want to do with my company. I want to be successful. Strategics are different. So I've told some of them, I've had some of them tell me they could care less about making money. It's there, and that's why we call them strategics. They're making investments for strategic reasons to do exactly what you just described. Get a peek under the hood, potential acquisition, potential license, potential something. So that's why I say it's very typical with a strategic that they'll come in with a check, and then they'll have their hand out looking for something else. And it's up to the company to negotiate and try to balance it. So, so the reason we had so many strategics was A, we were able to play them off a little bit, but B, that's just what was needed to fill out the investment round.
So at the time in which you raise money from the strategics, you raised the 30 million A round, what were some of the key hires at that point that you start to make? And I assume this is a move in which we've now de-risked the technology. We believe there's a real company here. We're identifying the market. What was that market and what was some of the talent that you started to put around the company?
Production engineers. So as a guy who got my degrees in civil engineering, that was an exciting time because all of a sudden lots of big equipment started to show up. Breaking ground on all kinds of cool stuff. And
feel like a real company at that point?
Felt like a real company. But basically, yeah, I mean, up until that point, our hiring had been what you would expect, a lot of scientists, that sort of thing. And then after that, it was just a lot of engineers, production type folks, and then technicians. And today, the vast majority of our hiring is just operators of equipment, technicians, things like that.
Super interesting.
Have you ever had to build out a big sales team?
No. I'm looking at my new chief marketing officer over there. No, I've always been it. I've always been a kind of a one-man sales team, so to speak. That's of course going to change, and so.
That's crazy. I mean, how do you?
Well, bear in mind, we historically hadn't had sales. So we didn't really need a sales team per se. We needed business development, which was engaging strategic partners towards some sort of cooperation agreements. Now, as we shift more towards a sales-oriented company, I anticipate that in the not too distant future, we will start building out a sales team.
Okay, and that's a great point, actually, for everybody to understand that you were pre-revenue at this point. Mm-hmm. So when you're a pre-revenue company with a deep tech technology, I mean, what were you telling people? When did you expect to even start making money?
Well, that's a great question. You can go look at our prospectus. And the way I'll answer that question is I'll really bring it back to our somewhat unique business model, which is actually to offload the cell, C-E-L-L business. And the reason I say that is because the cell business is massive. I mean, these are the market growth is huge, but the amount of capital that's required to get there is equally huge. For the other half of our business, which is focused on materials, that is not the case. You can get there much quicker with a lot less capital, and so on and so forth. And so that's why now, as we are today still pre-revenue, But line of sight to us for revenue is much more clear when we focus on the material side of the business.
Okay. And so will you have a close partner that you hope will someday make the cell that fits your
That is the plan.
materials?
That
Okay.
is the plan. Yep.
Okay. Will you have to spin that off, or do you think that like there's a big company like a Samsung, somebody in LG that will take this?
We don't know yet.
Okay.
We don't know yet. Yep. Keeping all options open.
With a lot of the unplugged companies that we have, our CEOs are in the software industry. This is such a unique situation where you raise $30 million in a Series A, but the goal is not necessarily product market fit and let's push revenues in the way that you'd have a software company trying to go up like a hockey stick, right?
Right.
What were the goals at that point, and what's a board meeting look like at that point in terms of what's the accountability? What's Dave Jansen saying in the room to you as chairman, like a year after the Series A at that point?
Yeah. Well, I mean, let me bring you back to the growth trajectory for the EV market. I mean, you're literally, talking $1 trillion market, within the next decade. So that's what really justifies the kinds of capital that we were raising being pre-revenue, because the payoff is immense. And so you're absolutely correct. The board meetings are not a lot. You don't spend a lot of time on the financials. As long as your spend is below what your plan was, everything is by and large pretty good. They tend to be a lot more focused on your business plan, and how you're executing on that, and how you're executing on your plan to engage various strategic and commercial partners, and so on and so forth. So it's much more kind of business oriented versus, financial.
What did the board look like before you took on outside money, and after the Series A, how did the board composition change?
Yep. So as you would expect, before we raised any money, it was all insiders. Both Conrad and Sehi both spent time on our board. Once we closed our Series A, we ended up with a 5-person board, of which only 2 of us were insiders, and the other 3 seats were held by investors, which is, again, very typical.
In terms of when we talk about board composition in the venture capital class, there's a lot of discussion around, in addition to financial capital, you're hoping for other forms of capital that board members might be able to offer. Strategic insight into the business and helping you with the business model, recruitment of talent, other forms of, I've seen this movie before, here's what I see coming. What do you think, Doug? How much leverage did you get in addition to financial capital from the board after bringing on outsiders?
Well, I would say if I look in the rearview mirror and think about what is the top thing that jumps out at me on my board, during that kind of Series A existence, to put it in very simple terms, it was focused on Series B. And so that's where I leveraged the board. And it turned out, one of our board members ended up being our Series B lead.
And how long between the Series A and the Series B?
We closed Series B in 2021, spring of 2021, so about 2.5 years.
2.5 years. And how big was the Series B?
135.
135 million. One more question, going back to the financial investor in the Series A. Most funds are 10 years in length. That means depending on how long the fund had been in existence when they cut you the check, they probably had some liquidity pressure coming. Did you know the time horizon for when they'd need to exit the event going into it? What was that dynamic?
It's a little bit more complicated than that, because our Series A and Series B for that lead investor were actually 2 different funds. So that we were never in this time pressure sort of thing. And of course now, all of our investors have a pretty clear line of sight to their liquidity.
Tell us just a little bit, because you did a SPAC last year, and so can you tell us a little bit about what is a SPAC, and why did you SPAC, and what do you get out of SPACing?
Right. So basically a SPAC, special purpose acquisition company, otherwise known as a reverse merger. So essentially the mechanics are that you as an operating company merge with this SPAC entity. Sometimes you'll hear them called blank check companies. So basically what a SPAC does is some sort of financial group goes out and says, we're going to raise a SPAC. So they go out to a bunch of institutional investors and they raise $200, $300, $400, $500 million. And that cash is then pooled, and it's just set aside. It's called the cash-in trust. And they're given a 2-year mandate to go around and find a company to acquire. And then they merge. And of course, you negotiate the terms. So it's very similar to the venture funding where you have to put a valuation to the company and so on and so forth. And so that's basically what we did throughout 2021. And then ultimately became public in December of 2021. In terms of where my head was at, up until some peer companies had gone public through a similar route, I'll be honest, I couldn't even spell SPAC. I'd never heard of a SPAC. And it was, as the concept was introduced to us, I looked at it through a very cynical lens, which is usually, as an engineer, I look at all kinds of financial stuff through a very cynical lens. But ultimately, I got pretty comfortable with it, partly because we had just a phenomenal SPAC sponsor that we'd gone through a very extensive due diligence process, and I felt really good about that because if I was going to do this, I needed the opposing party on the other side of the table to kick the tires pretty hard. And I saw a lot of groups not do that and still kind of want to do a transaction with us, and we just turned them down out of hand. So ultimately, I got comfortable with the process, and then just the fact that we would, again, if we execute on our roadmap, have the sufficient capital to execute on our business model. That's pretty appealing, because as you might have saw the trend, we went from Series A to Series B. What would have been next? Series C, then Series D. And what does that mean for yours truly? All I ever do is raise money.
Yes.
So, and that's tough because oftentimes the money doesn't come continuously, and so you'll go through growth spurts and then stop while you're going through the fundraising process, and that just slows down what you're doing with the technology. And we were concerned by that because we were looking out in the marketplace and we were looking at other peer companies that were very, very well capitalized, and we were like, we're going to be at a huge disadvantage if we don't at least consider this. And so that's ultimately what got myself and the rest of us at Solid Power comfortable.
Yeah, that's a great reason. Was it you who rang the bell on December 9th?
Well, it was NASDAQ's. There's not really a bell. I pressed a button. Oh, and then I think I had to sign my name on some screen.
Electronically?
Yeah.
So is it thrilling? I mean,
It was cool. It was super cool.
Yeah.
I didn't know. You have to realize I'd been essentially running a marathon because we raised Series B in, I think that was May of 2021. We announced our merger agreement in June of 2021.
Yeah.
So anyone who's ever gone through due diligence, literally we were going through due diligence for Series B and for a SPAC at the exact same time.
Wow.
Then going through some of the others. So 2021 was exhausting. And I didn't really even think about ringing the bell, I think, until I got there. Like in fact, my assistant who's here was kind of like, how come you're not excited? And I'm like, I don't know, I'm just tired. But then you got there, you get into it, and it was really, really cool.
I want to pause there a minute, just because I think we don't talk about this much. I know that tired.
Yeah.
Running a company, running a startup is a lot of work, and it's the most thrilling thing you'll ever do, and it's the most draining.
Yeah.
Was this the first time you were there, or is this sort of cyclical across running all of this?
First time.
Yeah, the first time to just hit that level of exhaustion that you're not even excited about.
Yeah, I mean,
this
because we had sold Rocor at the end of 2020. So right as we were gearing up to do Series B, we were going through the due diligence, and that was sold to a private equity firm. So you can only imagine how much due diligence we were going through. So it was just an 18-month period that was just absolutely exhausting.
Yeah.
But pretty darn satisfying,
Yeah.
I can say today.
So if you didn't hire a sales team and you've got a new marketer, I mean, that much work, who did you hire to support you on the business side? You got all the technical folks, but what did you need?
We had, I had some resources, I had some folks that I had to rely on. But again, anytime you're going through any sort of startup that's growing, you've got to wear multiple hats, and there's just no question about it. You've got to jump in and just do what needs to be done. Now I'd like to think that I'm taking lessons from my career in actually, bringing in people to complement me, to take things off, my desk, and it's been immensely rewarding because, you know, John just took about 90% of what I do.
Couple questions before we open things up for Q&A with the audience. One is, you know, culture is an interesting dimension of companies, and I've spoken to CEOs who feel like if you don't get the culture right at the start, it's really difficult to change it later on. What did the three of you and others back in 2011 talk about things like culture, or was it just like, let's figure out whether we can scale this technology? What did you do early on, and how has that worked out over time as the company's gotten bigger and more high profile?
Yeah. So did we talk about culture back in 2011? Absolutely not. There was, you know, that was way down the list.
That's when there were two people in a closet?
Yeah, two people in a closet. That being said, culture is critical. And I think with both organizations, both Rocore and Solid Power, we've done, you know, we did immensely well at creating, you know, very positive company culture. I mean, I'll use a very specific example. Solid Power, throughout its history, has seen remarkably low employee turnover. And I say this having, you know, plugged into a bunch of other businesses where I see, even here in the Denver metro area, you know, turnover with those companies was just immensely higher than it ever was at Solid Power. And I'd like to think that's a direct reflection of culture. Now, as we grow, I mean, we just hit, I mean, we passed 100 a couple months ago. I think we're at 120, 130. I just met 3 or 4 new people this morning. Now we're being very mindful of, okay, what do we do? Let's not screw this up. We've got a second facility that we're opening in Thornton. So now we're going to have physically, you know, separate, you know, people. How do we continue to preserve culture? And I don't have an answer for you yet. I mean, stay tuned.
What are core elements? If you were to say, you know, here's what we are about in terms of how we run this company. I've heard others, you know, here's like our core values, or we believe in transparency. Everyone's got a voice. What in terms of Solid Power?
Well, I would say it stems from my philosophy, which again, I bring it back to having spent a decade working for others, learning what not to do. So what appealed to me was, you know, integrity. I never wanted to see any, you know, whiffs of anything sketchiness happening around me. Relative transparency. You know, for myself, being a fairly authentic leader, what you see is what you get. And so that's sort of the ideals that I subscribe to. To be honest, we've never formally sat down and wrote our core values. We may do that here in the not too distant future, but we've been by and large pretty successful in just kind of embracing, you know, ethos that I subscribe to and kind of sharing those with the rest of the team.
One final question before we open up from my end. 2011, the start to now. I mean, it's such a great story coming from CU. Looking back, you know, what did you get out of CU and the relationship here? Like, this turned out to be really helpful. And in terms of some of the frictions and difficulties, what was missing? They're like, if we would have had this, or if we could develop this kind of muscle at CU, it would be just immensely easier going forward.
So I'll take those in reverse. I think what would have been most helpful was what you're doing. So when I met you earlier today and you told me about your venture fund, I'm like, damn, I could have used you a decade ago, because nothing like that existed. There was no, there was really nothing. There was no real source of, you know, early stage investing, at least for what we were doing. And so, you know, and of course, you know, Conrad and Sehi could certainly chime in afterwards if they agree or disagree, but by and large, we had to do it on our own. I mean, we had to, it was the 3 of us meeting with Tech Transfer. You know, at the time, Tech Transfer didn't really know what to do with us because we didn't have, you know, a financial backer that put a valuation to the company. So we had to negotiate all of that. And it suddenly dawned on me that, and again, this is 10 years ago, so it suddenly dawned on me that really the Tech Transfer office just was not equipped to deal with us, because they just relied on the investment community to, you know, to put valuations and to put terms, and yeah, as long as it looks pretty reasonable, okay, where do I sign? absent of that, they just didn't know what to do with us. So it was a slog.
And I'll draw your attention. And what leverage did you get from the university that was helpful along the way?
I would say great support from the offices of Conrad Stolt and Sehi Lee.
Yeah.
So wouldn't have been successful early on if we weren't able to leverage those resources.
Let's open up for questions. And we've got a Silicon Flatirons tradition that students get the first question. Sarah, are you running the mic? Sarah Schnickeren on the mic. Let's get a student question. Looks like we've got one up here.
Hi, thanks for presenting. That was fascinating.
Yep.
I'm going to take this off for a second.
Yeah, no.
Lucas Stevenson, civil engineer, MBA, first year at CU. The question is about the federal funding you got. I'm guessing there was like one specific vehicle that probably gave you a big push funding wise. I'm wondering where you get that.
Yep, ARPA-E. So that's what really launched us. It was, I think, about $3.5 to $4 million. So that's a great program, by the way. I mean, I think it's fair to say without that ARPA-E grant, we probably would not have gotten off the ground.
So ARPA-E is out of the DOE, the Department of Energy. How'd you find out about it?
Well, because remember my one tool in my toolkit? So I was very well connected with
You'd applied
the
before.
various funding agencies. And you know, ARPA-E was it was quite new at the time. It was modeled after DARPA, which is, you know, DARPA's, they do stuff for defense. But basically what they do is they fund high risk, high return, which was exactly what we were. You know, there was still a lot of risk, so we definitely hit the high risk, check that box. But the return, you know, on what it could do to future vehicle electrification was equally high, and so we checked that box as well.
You said something in the prep call that I did not think of. It's not just vehicle electrification in terms of some of the market opportunities. For example, military
Absolutely.
is primarily electronics in the field. A better battery there would be extremely attractive.
Yep.
Across a number of verticals. This is big.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And that's actually how I got introduced to batteries. I did not get into batteries through the transportation industry, rather through the defense and aerospace. Because again, my background way back then was mostly defense and aerospace. And you're absolutely correct. Similar to what we as consumers are doing in electrifying everything, our military is increasingly electrified as well. And I would venture to say their pain point with batteries is perhaps even more acute with electric vehicles. Unfortunately, that market is very tiny relative to the electric vehicle market.
So let's take another question in the room here. And Nate, are you able to see the chat? For those who are watching virtually tonight, if you've got a question, drop it into the chat and Nate can shout it out. Or if you have a correction of the story, Dave Jansen, you can jump in as well.
Hi, my name's Avi. I'm 18. I'm a freshman at Leeds. So what went to your decision about going public as a company?
Well, I think I touched on most of that. You know, ultimately, you know, for me, I always look at capital as kind of it's a necessary part of what you're doing, but it's just a means to an end. So whether capital comes from the federal government or whether it comes from venture capitalists or from public investors, I mean, to me, it's just the fuel to get us there. And so ultimately what attracted us to going public is that, again, assuming we're successful in executing on the business model we've established, it fully funds our business model. And I cannot, for anyone who's raised money for you know, startups, I cannot trivialize that at all.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
So when it fully funds, I mean, what's the end?
Basically to the point at which revenues take over.
Okay.
Nate, do we have an online question?
We do. Given your tremendous R&D achievements, what battery do you have now? And when will you have revenues for an EV battery in the market?
So I don't know if those who are at home could pick it up without the microphone. Can they? Okay, go ahead.
So I think the question was, what batteries do we have now? So as we put out in various public statements, we're producing cells that are getting into the EV relevant size. So just to put it to numbers, we build cells today up to 20 amp hours. And then once our next production facility is up and running, that gets us to full scale with our cell product. And those should be start being produced later this year. In terms of revenues, where it really begins to pick up is when we get into a cell SOP start of production that then supports a vehicle SOP start of production. That could happen as soon as 2026, kind of in this 2026 to 2028 revenue or range is when we see, when we anticipate the uptick in revenues.
Let's go here.
Hi, Sammy Hauser, another MBA student. I'm just kind of curious, thinking long-term strategy. So are you considering, or how do you view kind of like the potential obsolescence of your like sulfide-based electrolyte, given like maybe due to creative destruction or the fact that like your product has dependencies that maybe are outside of your control? So if I think of like maybe say specifically the EV industry, right? Like dependent on EV car adoption, right? Like your product, you know, is only as good as the people who want to buy it. Or maybe alternative energy sources, or even like cell structure capability. So as you're producing the material, what if somebody designed something that doesn't work backwards compatible? Is there a long-term strategy for pivoting if that has to happen?
Yeah, I mean, nothing's without risk. Nothing is, you know, 100% guaranteed. I mean, heck, who could have thought that a potential fire could have taken out our facility? I mean, the fire got within, you know, a mile of our facility. I would have never in my wildest dreams thought that could be a risk factor. So now you have to think of just all kinds of different risk factors. I guess a couple thoughts here. One that makes me feel relatively confident is that I don't tend to lose a lot of sleep about new emerging battery technologies coming along. And that's simply because the barrier to entry is huge. I mean, to where we're at today took a decade. And so, you know, if some new idea is born in a scientist's head, you know, tomorrow, I mean, that's not really going to show up on my radar screen for, you know, a decade and a half. So that's just kind of a blanket statement on just kind of batteries in general. And then to your question was a little kind of complicated in that it was touching on all kinds of risk factors, but I would just say broadly, you know, we're addressing all of our risk factors up and down the supply chain, mainly through diversification, not necessarily diversify away from sulfides. We're strong believers in sulfides, but just in terms of diversifying on some of, you know, different supply materials and things like that.
Let's go here and then we'll go, actually, Sarah, I think you're closer to here. We'll come over to you from there.
Hey, my name's Robert. I'm also an MBA here. So I was just wondering, how do you protect what you have now? I know you have all these strategic investors, and how do you keep what you have from getting to them to a point that they can manufacture it on a bigger scale? And thanks for coming.
Yeah, no, IP, intellectual property protection, is a huge part of our business. I mean, gosh, you need to look no further than, you know, a recent lawsuit between, you know, SK Innovation and LG, now LG Energy Solutions. That was pretty nasty. So early on, IP protection is, in theory, relatively easy because usually it's patent filings. And, you know, you can typically, especially in our business, you know, material compositions, that's pretty easy to protect because I can go and, if you're using my materials, I can just go and analyze and be like, aha, you're stealing my IP. One of the interesting things that we're now finding ourselves is as we get more and more into manufacturing and manufacturing scale, we're developing a lot of IP. But it's not patentable IP. It's what we call trade secret IP. It's the formula to Coke, right? You don't want to write that down on a piece of paper and then publish it as a patent, because then anyone and their mother could go and do it. And that's a little trickier in terms of how you do that. And so it's something we're working through as we speak. So I don't have a definitive concrete answer to you. We have a pretty robust in terms of how we protect it internally via our people, and we're pretty good about how we protect it when we bring others in. But it's one of those things where, you know, we want to ensure that we continue to protect this long term, and as you get bigger and bigger and bigger, it becomes inherently more and more challenging, because it's not like we just have, you know, a secret sauce for Coca-Cola that we stick in a safe and call it good. We have trade secret and intellectual property throughout, our whole manufacturing facility. So it's something that we're deploying a lot of resources around right now.
Is this an area, as with some others, where companies amass a patent portfolio almost like nuclear arms, that I know the other party has nuclear arms. I don't necessarily even want all these patents, but if they launch their nukes my way, I'm getting them back. Is that the way it is around batteries as well?
It is. And it's only been recently that we've had, plenty of resources to go and do that. Because there is an element of, okay, how high is your stack of paper versus my stack of paper? So it absolutely is that way in batteries. And, all I can say is our stack of paper is going to start getting taller.
On behalf of the patent bar, we thank you for that. Let's move over here.
But does it also make you go back to the culture thing, where you're trying to keep your employees and not let the trade secrets out the door?
Yep. And so implementing controls without making people unhappy is another tricky thing that we have to navigate.
That can be hard. The non-competes can be hard in Colorado, as an example. So, but you also just kind of want them to stay, want them to be happy. So
absolutely.
Interesting. Okay.
All right, my name is Max. I'm a senior undergraduate in mechanical engineering. I was wondering what the process is like taking an idea out of a university research lab. So I thought the university claimed ownership over some ideas that it funded and how you take those to the market.
Yep, so that's really part of the negotiation that occurs between the company and the university's tech transfer office or whatever it's called today. And so just like in any classic negotiation, myself and the two inventors are on one side of the table saying, well, that baby's kind of ugly. I don't know, I don't think there's a whole lot there. And the university's like, oh no, that's the most beautiful baby I've ever seen. And so, we arm wrestle over it and land at a number. And so typically what'll happen is you'll negotiate certain licensing terms with royalty fees, and then typically the university will then take a stake in the company.
And just to double check, I'm guessing that the two of you probably had an invention disclosure. The tech transfer office circa 2010, did they pursue a patent around the disclosures?
Yeah.
And so the university did own that. And so you've got this unusual dynamic where the inventors are back negotiating against the university for the license that really is the core of the company as of 2010, 2011. I'll just parenthetically add that under Bryn's leadership, the then tech transfer office, now it's called CU Venture Partners, with Sally's muscle especially, moved to trying to help companies grow as opposed to just licensing things out. There's been a lot more emphasis on that the last, call it 5 to 10 years at CU overall in terms of trend line. Let's go back, Rich.
Hey, Doug, thanks for coming. Rich Boyan, a member of the community. How would you compare the environmental impacts of the production and disposal / recycling of the sulfide solid state batteries versus, say, lithium?
Yep. Yeah. So it's an area that we're getting more and more into. It's unfortunately, I can't say anything definitive today because we're still investigating it. But I will say this: one of our investors is one of the world's largest recyclers of lithium-ion batteries, and so as part of our interfacing with this company, we spent a bit of time with the group that invented the process around the recycling that they do on lithium-ion batteries. And they came to the conclusion that they didn't see any reason why this would be any less recyclable, meaning it would be less efficient in extracting the lithium and the nickel and the cobalt. It doesn't close the book by any means, but it certainly gave us a high degree of confidence that we weren't at least making things less recyclable. But it is an area we're going to start actually proving out, more than likely probably via this strategic partner.
Nate, we've got another question online.
We do. If making solid electrolytes is the long-term goal, why did Solid Power begin making batteries in the first place?
Yeah, because at the end of the day, the car makers buy batteries. They don't buy electrolyte. So even if you think you've got the greatest thing since sliced bread for a solid electrolyte, your test vehicle is a battery. And so that begs the question, well, could I just leverage someone else to build the battery? And we concluded no, for two reasons. One, finding the right facility, the right partner was very, very difficult. And two, we saw a lot of value capture there. Because even though I say we step out of the cell production business, you better believe we're going to monetize that side of the business because there's a lot of value there. And so that's really why, out of necessity and to maximize value capture.
Go here, and we'll move up. Yep. I see you, Andrew. Get you next.
Thank you so much for your time. I'll finish out the four MBA stooges here.
Represent really well here. Way to bring it.
That was a really good segue. Sort of following up on that, I think two questions. One, 8 years sort of developing and trying to figure out how to scale sort of a sulfide-based solid state.
Mm-hmm.
All of a sudden, you're seeing in the tea leaves. Actually, I think we're gonna our new sort of what's the racehorse expression? Like our new prize horse is actually the chemicals.
Mm-hmm.
What's the financing or strategic decision to sort of make that sort of the priority in the long term? And maybe it's sort of a bonus follow-up to that. How as a co-founder are you sort of able to stay up on the balcony to maintain perspective and see trends shift and make product shift decisions based on that?
Yep. Well, I'll start first with the second half of your question, which is, and I'll really bring it back to the statement I made around, I had stayed in the saddle of running both Rocore and Solid Power too long. And it was really to that point. I was spending too much time with my head down, fighting fires, just being reactive, responding to this, responding to that, and not, taking time to, look out and see what's happening. And so the way I do that is really augmenting myself with an incredibly effective team. So, I'd love to think of myself as a genius, but I'm not. But I think what I'm really good at is finding key folks that complement me well, and I mean complement. So what I'm really good at is focusing on only those things that I'm good at, and trust me, it's a very narrow slice, and that's all I do. And then I get people to fill out the pie because they're really good at this part, and so on and so forth. And once you get a team that works effectively like that, that's really what affords you to focus in on what you really should be, which for me as a CEO is the vision and the strategy around where we're going. And I completely forgot the first part of your question.
So even with a partnership with BMW and Ford, that's almost sort of sounding like going to be secondary moving forward in the future with chemistries and sort of becoming the main line of business.
Yeah. So I'm remembering now. I think you said why choose that strategy? I'm a pragmatist, and so I could have said, well, I'm going to be the best battery company ever, and I'm going to go and I'm going to displace Panasonic and CATL and Samsung, and that's tough, man. That's tough. And oh, by the way, I'm probably going to need like $10 billion to do it. We're talking about having.
Sally's got a new fund.
I heard that. So we'll talk afterwards. It's just tough. It just elevates the risk profile for the business for things that are just beyond. Once you get into those kinds of dollars for capital, there's just so many things that are just outside of your control. Whereas in the materials business, not to say we don't have competitors, but they're not any. Once we finish out our production for this year, we'll be just as big as them. We certainly couldn't make that claim on the cell production side for Panasonic. And so, we don't have the likes of those kind of companies that we have to displace. And oh, by the way, I don't need $10 billion to get there. The capital I just raised could potentially get me there. So pragmatic.
For those keeping track at home, we've had questions from the business school, two different parts of engineering, the community, and now we're going to round it out with the law school. Andrew, you've got a question. We'll hit this. I like to say these sessions bring together people in the campus who should be in the same room together, but never are outside of basketball games, football games, and Entrepreneurs Unplugged. So go ahead, Andrew.
Thank you for being
being here tonight. I think actually a lot of that was in answering my question, which was surrounding the philosophy that you would, I don't know if you'd call it a philosophy or an approach, but this idea that you're not a car battery company, you are a materials company first.
Yep.
How do you sort of address that in your day-to-day or week-to-week operations? How do you sort of implement that into your vision in the future?
Yep.
And if you do find an opportunity that comes along that is, outside of the scope of like car battery manufacturing, how would you plan to integrate that or implement that into your business as currently run?
Yeah, absolutely. So so I guess taking those in reverse, other markets, absolutely. So we are pursuing other markets outside of the transportation industry. We don't talk about it as much, not because we're trying to hide anything, but most people don't care. They want to hear about electric vehicles, and I get it. The market is just absolutely immense, but there is absolutely opportunities in things like military and defense, aerospace, of which we have active contracts going in developing products for those particular markets. I will say they're easier markets. Their requirements are not nearly as hard. I mean, an EV is probably one of the hardest sets of specifications for a battery. I mean, it needs to have infinitely high energy and be charged in a nanosecond. And of course, cost nothing. Other markets aren't like that. They're just a lot easier. But again, unfortunately, they're just very, very tiny relative to the electric vehicle market. What was the first half of your question? Seems to be a theme for me.
The philosophy behind basically being a materials company before you're a car battery company.
Oh, yeah. Again, I think I said it earlier. It's just is a very pragmatic. Oh, and I think your question was around, so how does that distill into the operations? It actually doesn't. We are a cell company. You come to our facility and you're going to see a cell production facility, and you're going to see a whole lot of cells being produced and being tested and so on and so forth. It's really more in the vision and the strategy, going out and speaking with various strategic partners and making them aware that this is the point at which we anticipate stepping out of the cell production business and onboarding a partner and so on and so forth.
Brad, do we have time for one more?
Yeah.
I think I saw somebody in the third row. Yeah, right there. Would you like to ask?
Hi, thanks for coming out tonight. I really appreciate you guys being here. My name is Megan Webster. I'm actually a prospective Solid Power employee.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, chemical engineer position, so I'm very excited about that. I just got the email before this event that they're bringing me on site for an interview, so I'm very excited about that.
Hey, good luck.
Thank you.
The negotiations right now?
Yeah, nobody interviews with me.
No, that's fine. My question was more so because I'm very interested in battery technology. What is your timeline for switching over to being more of a materials company? And then twofold, is that new facility that you're building in Thornton, is that more to focus on the electrolyte production, or is that also going to be a ramp up of batteries themselves?
Mostly so the second facility is mostly for materials, which is great because it's making room in our existing facility as we expand the cell production side of things.
So we have a program I'm going to give a plug for before we thank Doug and Sally. Sarah Schnickgren is the Director of Student Programs here at Silicon Flatirons. We run a program called Startup Summer, which matches companies with interns and interns. And then once a week, those interns across the different companies get together with us at Startup Summer. They get to meet other interns in the area, and they build their own companies on nights and weekends.
Oh, cool.
So would love to have Solid Power interns involved if you guys are so inclined.
Would love to
And
do
if
it.
some of you have companies that may have interns, talk to Sarah. Or if you are thinking, I'm a student, I'm an undergrad, this sounds interesting, talk to Sarah as well. This is such a fabulous story to have Sehi and Conrad here. Bryn, thanks so much for teaming up through the Venture Partners office. Sally, awesome to co-pilot this with you.
Great.
Please help me give a warm thank you to Doug Campbell. This is terrific.